So the last time we looked at modern literary criticism. Terminating with Eliot's tradition and individual talent. So today we move away from there to look at our first theory. Because all this while we've been grappling with some of the definitional issues and conceptual issues and literary criticism. We also spent a lot of time looking at literary history, which is very important to understanding literary criticism, where it has been, its development through the years, and where it is at the moment. So we'll move on to new criticism. New criticism. New criticism is known by many names. In case you do not hear new criticism, you might hear something else. So you should know that it is the same thing we are talking about. You can call it modernism because it is text-based criticism. So you can call it modernism. You can call it textual criticism. Textual criticism, the same thing as modernism, because modernism is a text-directed critique. You can call it ontological criticism. You can call it ontological criticism. It is also called formalism. Formalism. It's also referred to as formalism, as well as aesthetic criticism. As well as aesthetic criticism. New criticism has many proponents. New criticism has many proponents. Some of them are Clint Brooks. Clint is spelled C-L-E-A-N-T-H. C-L-E-A-N-T-H. Clint Brooks. Brooks is spelled B-R-O-O-K-S. You also have I.A. Richards. I.A. Richards. Another important proponent of formalism, where I stands for Ivor, I-V-O-R, and A stands for Armstrong, I-A Richard, Ivor Armstrong Richards. I'm about to add S to Richards. You have Rene Wellet. Renewele. Renewele. W-E. Double L-E. K. That's Wele. W-E. Double L-E-K. W-E. Double L-E-K. Wele. Rene is spelled R-E-N-E. R-E-N-E. With an accent on top of E, the final E. R-E-N-E. Renewele. Renewele. They have W.K. Wimsatt. W.K. Wimsatt. W.K. Wimsatt. Wimsatt is spelled W-I-M-S-A-T-T. Where W means Williams. Where W means Williams. We have W means William, stands for William. Then K stands for Kurtz. So you have William Kurtz Wimsatt. W.K. Wimsatt. Kurtz is spelled K-U-R-T-Z. Sorry, K-T-Z. K-U-R-T-Z. Kurtz. William Kurtz Wimsatt. Then we have John Crow Ransom. John Crow Ransom. John Crow Ransom. Crow is spelled C-R-O-W-E. John Crow Ransom. Ransom is spelled R-A-N-S-O-M. Another proponent of formalism is R.P. Blackman. R.P. Blackman. Blackman is spelled B-L-A-C-K-M-U-R. B-L-A-C-K-M-U-R. Blackman. R stands for Richard and P stands for Palmer. Richard Palmer Blackman. Richard Palmer Blackman. New criticism leave that place. New criticism was popular in the 1930s and the 1940s. It came as a reaction against a type of criticism known as the historical approach. Where the life of the author or the information about the life of the author is used to interpret the text. In what is known as biographical criticism. It's also reacted against another form of historical criticism. Another form of historical criticism in which history serves as a background to the understanding of the literary text. Where history serves as a background to the understanding of the literary text. Rather, new criticism emphasizes the importance of paying exclusive attention to the text, of paying exclusive attention to the text. Because the new critics, and by the new critics we refer to those who apply new critical principles to the interpretation of literature. Because the new critics believe that the meaning of the text resides in the text itself. The new critics believe that the meaning of the text resides in the text itself, and not outside the text. This explains why new criticism is called textual criticism, among other names. New criticism also pays attention to the form of the literary text. The form of the literary text, which is seen to be organic. That means self-contained. New criticism also pays attention to the form of the literary text, which is seen to be organic. That is self-contained. So the literary text or the poem, as the new critics will call literature. The literary text or the poem, as new critics will call literature, has its own form and structure, has its own internal form and structure, which makes the text self-contained, meaning that it is complete on its own. Meaning that the text is complete on its own. Which makes the text self-contained, and which makes the text complete on its own. So the critic has to study this structure or form in order to realize the meaning of the text. We have to find the meaning in the text. So emphasis is on the form of the literary text. Before the new critics arrived in the literary scene, it was believed that the literary text derived its structure from the external world. It was believed that the literary text derived its structure from the external world. So that means that in order to understand the text, one needed to understand the world outside the text. That means that in order to understand the literary text, one needed to understand the world outside the literary text. But with the new critics, the formalists, the textual critics, emphasis was shifted to the text, and it was believed that the text had its own structure, independent of the external world. It was believed that the text had its own structure, independent of the external world. Thus, it was not necessary to use information outside the text to interpret the text. The text had its own meaning. Which must be deciphered by the critic. Must be deciphered by the critic. Which must be deciphered by the critic. D-E-C-I-P-H-E-R-E-D. Deciphered by the critic. Formalism or new criticism prides itself on providing the scientific principle for the reading of literature. Formalists and new critics pride themselves on having formalized the scientific reading of literature. Having formalized the scientific reading of literary texts. they believe that they had evolved a set of principles that will guide people to scientifically study a text, to arrive at what they call objective meaning of the text. To arrive at what they call the objective meaning of the text. By objective meaning, they mean the meaning that everyone who deploys this same principle will arrive at in the text. By objective meaning, they refer to the fact that everyone who deploys the new critical principle will arrive at the same meaning in the text. That is why the meaning is objective. If you go by the reading of the text in the way the new critics or the formalists want you to, you will arrive at the same meaning as any other formalist anywhere in the world. So that is why this reading of the text by the formalist is called scientific. Why it is called scientific? Because it departs from the conventional reading of literature, where each individual can describe the text the way he or she wants. A formalist reading of literature departs from the conventional reading of literature, where different people arrive at different interpretation of the text. In a formalist reading of literature, everyone is supposed to arrive at the same meaning, which is why it is called objective meaning. Why it is called objective meaning. And it is why it is called scientific reading. New criticism is also called aesthetic criticism because it basically studies the language of the literary text to reveal its beauty. New criticism is also called aesthetic criticism because it basically studies the language of the literary text in order to reveal its what? Beauty. Its beauty. Not to reveal its beauty. So the object of new criticism is the language of the text. Attention is basically paid to how the author deploys language, literary language, in the text. And in studying this language, we discover the beauty of literature. That's why it is called aesthetic criticism. We discover the wit, the cleverness, the intellectualism that the author has put into the work. We discover the creativity, the imagination of the author. Of course, emphasis is not on the author, but emphasis is on the text. So you must understand that new criticism is one of the linguistic theories of literature. New criticism is one of the linguistic theories of literature. One of the language-based theories of literature. It is also one of the theories that imbibe the principles of art for art's sake. Also one of the theories that imbibe the principle of art for art's sake. Art for art's sake. Art for art's sake is a term used to describe the study of literature for its own sake, for its beauty, for its imagination, and not for the transformation of society, for its own sake, for its beauty, for its imagination, and not for the transformation of society. There are some key terms that could help you understand new criticism. Some key terms that could help you understand new criticism. Because when we speak of theory, we speak in terms of the putting together of literary concepts and principles to help us unlock the meaning of the text based on a given worldview. One of such terms is the point. The point. One of such terms is the point. The point. P-O-E-N. The point. The point. The new critics see all literary genres as point. They call literature point. Point. You need to understand that the description of literature as point goes back to Plato and Aristotle. And even in the Renaissance, the term poem was still being used in criticism to refer to literature. So you should not be confused whenever you read a new critical book, formalist textbook, and you see the word poem being used. It is actually a term that refers to literature generally. Ambiguity. 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 Ambiguity is the conflict that is generated through the use of language in the poem, as in the literature. Ambiguity is the conflict. Ambiguity is the conflict that is generated in the text because of the use of language. This, as far as the new critics are concerned, ambiguity is what creates tension in the literary text. Ambiguity is what creates tension in the literary text. As far as the new critics are concerned, tension is generated in the literary text. Tension is generated in the literary text because of the existence of ambiguity. Ambiguity is as a result of the author's use of language at various levels of signification. Ambiguity results because the author uses language at various levels of signification. For instance, in one text, you can find that sometimes the author makes use of denotative meaning. Sometimes the author makes use of connotative meaning. Sometimes the author uses figurative expression. Sometimes the author makes use of idiom, even special meaning of words, specialized meaning, symbols, and so on and so forth. So these different levels of diction is what generates tension. It's what makes the text difficult to understand. What generates tension in the text, it is what makes the text difficult to understand. So the meaning of the text will only be known when all the ambiguities have been resolved. The meaning of the text will only emerge after the critic, after the reader. The reader is the critic. Reading is criticism. All right? The reader is a critic. Reading means criticism. So ambiguity will only be resolved when when the reader has done what? Has resolved the ambiguous use of words. That means you can only arrive at the meaning of the text. For the new critics, you can only arrive at the meaning of the text when you've known which word has been used denotatively and which one has been used connotatively. When you have understood the meaning of the figurative tropes in the text, the idioms and all of that. And this process is called deciphering. It's called what? Deciphering. Deciphering. So the text then becomes a coup. The text then becomes a coup. So the process is called deciphering. D-E-C-I-P-H-E-R-I-N-G. Process called deciphering. So deciphering implies that the text is coded. The text is coded, the poem is coded. Meaning that it cannot be understood at first value. Cannot be understood at first value. There is a need to read. And by reading, we mean to interpret. We need to read. By reading, we mean to interpret. First value. FACE. First value. Just by looking at it, you will not understand it. There's intentional fallacy. Another term that I need to understand as far as formalism or new criticism is concerned is intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy. Or error in reading. Or error in interpretation. Intentional fallacy is the error or the fallacy that the author has an intention in writing the text, and that it is the task of the critic to discover this intention. Intentional fallacy in new criticism is the error or the fallacy that the false thinking that the author usually has an intention in writing the text, and that it is the duty of the critic to do what? To discover this intention. The new critic insists that there is no such intention. The new critic insists that there is no such intention, and that the duty of the critic is not to discover the author's intention of writing the text. That means for the new critics, there is no authorial meaning. That means that for the new critics, there is no authorial meaning. There is no authorial meaning. For the new critics, there is no authorial meaning. Like the structuralists, the new critics believe in the death of the author. Believe in the death of the author. New critics believe in the death of the author. The death of the author. This is not a literal death. This is not a literal death. Literal. This is not a literal death, but rather a metaphoric or figurative death. But rather a metaphoric or metaphoric death. So the author dies once he has completed the writing of the text. The author dies once he has completed the writing of the text. The author ceases to exist once he has completed the writing of the text. The author ceases to exist once he has completed the writing of the text. So he has no control. The author has no control over how the text should mean. The author has no control over how the text should mean because he is dead. The author has no control over how the text should be interpreted because he's dead. Besides, the new critics believe that there is an objective meaning in the text that has to be revealed through a systematic study of the text. Besides that, the new critics believe that there is an objective meaning in the text which can only be unlocked through a systematic study of the text. And by systematic study, we refer to carefully following the formalist principles of reading a text. Carefully following the formalist principles of reading the text. That's what we mean by objectivity. Another term you should understand in formalist criticism is affective fallacy. Another term you should understand in formalist criticism is affective fallacy. Affective is spelled A-F-F-E-C-T-I-V-E. A-F-F-E-C-T-I-V-E. Affective fallacy. It refers to the error in reading in which the critic believes that his own emotion or feeling should be the basis for the interpretation of literature. Where the critic believes that his own or her own emotion or feeling should be the basis for the interpretation of literature. Thus, the new critics kick against the interpretation of the text based on how the individual feels. This is immature criticism. This is immature criticism. Interpreting a text based on how the reader feels or the emotion of the reader is not a sophisticated method of reading. Not a sophisticated method of reading. The interpretation of literature should not be based on emotions, as far as the new critics are concerned, but rather the interpretation of literature should be based on sound and tested literary rules or principles. Sound and tested literary rules and principles. So it is fallacious for anyone to think, and of course, I am speaking as a formalist, so it is fallacious for anyone to think that the emotions serve as the basis, or should serve as the basis for understanding the text. It's an immature reading of the text. A mature reading of the text deploys the formalist rules and principles, which is scientific and which is objective, right? It's scientific. The rules are scientific and objective. So that Mr. A will read the text and arrive at the same meaning as Mr. B. And that would be the scientific meaning of the text. Another important term that you need to be acquainted with in formalism is the heresy of paraphrase. Heresy of paraphrase. Where heresy is spelled H-E-R-E-S-Y. We have paraphrase. Heresy of paraphrase. Heresy or paraphrase. The word heresy is normally used in religious contexts to talk about blasphemy, to mean blasphemy, or sacrilegious words or practices. In the context of new criticism, heresy or paraphrase refers to the erroneous belief that a work of art could still retain its meaning after it has been altered, after its language has been altered. The work of art still retains its meaning after its language has been altered. Or after it has been paraphrased, after its language has been changed. But we know what paraphrase is. Rewriting a text in other words, or in another way, but still retaining the same meaning. That's what paraphrase is. Paraphrase refers to the act of rewriting a text in another words, using another words, but with the same sense, the same semantic sense being retained. This can work in other critical tools, but as far as the new critics are concerned, once the language of the text is changed or altered, it loses its meaning. As far as the new critics are concerned, once the language of the literary text is altered, it loses its meaning. Once the language of the literary text has been altered, it loses its meaning. In other words, the formalists are telling us that we cannot paraphrase the poem and still have the meaning it originally had. We cannot paraphrase the poem and still retain its original meaning. Once the text is paraphrased, it loses its original meaning. So we've talked about this issue when we talked about metaphysical poetry. Because metaphysical poetry is fragile. It's a fragile work of art. In the sense that the author is careful to use the best words in the best structure, so that a change in any of the words will destroy the meaning of the poem. Right? So it is from here that the formalists draw from to tell us that the work of art is complete when it arrives, and that when there's an attempt to paraphrase, to change the words, we will destroy the meaning of the word. You might even make it opposite. So you cannot paraphrase the work of literature. This is what we mean by heresy of paraphrase. This is what we meant by the heresy of paraphrase. Now, the reason this is so is because the formalists believe that there is no separation between content and form. As far as literature is concerned, there's no separation between content and form. This is referred to as the monist or the monistic view of literature or language, the monistic view of language. M-O-N-I-S-T-I-C, monistic view of language. The formalists have a monistic view of language. And when you have a monistic view of language, you do not see a difference between content and what? And form. Content and form are one and inextricably bound in the text. So that to alter the language is to alter the meaning. All right? Where the language is the form and the meaning is the content. Remember I said that you cannot study literature successfully without being good in language. You have to be well versed in your language. So the content refers to the meaning of the work, what the work says. And form refers to the language, how it is said. So for the formalists, language is monistic, no separation between content and form. That is why when you alter the language, you alter the meaning. So this explains the heresy of paraphrase, which the formalists believe in. The text cannot be paraphrased. Text cannot be paraphrased. So those who believe that the alteration in language might not affect content are called the dualists. The dualists. Because they see a separation between language, between content and form. They see a separation between content and form. They see a separation between content and form. Dualists are the dualists. D-U-A-L-I-S-T are the dualists. So a typical study of a poem based on new criticism. Of course, new criticism is how it is called in the US, in American schools. will demand the following. We demand the following strategies. Demand the following strategies. We demand the following strategies. Number one, there should be a close reading of the text. There should be a close reading of the text. A close reading of the text is a conscious reading of the text. It's a formalist term that refers to the proper reading of the text. Proper reading of the text, a close reading. The kind of reading that pays attention to how words are used in various ways in the text. The kind of reading that pays attention to the diction and their signification, diction and how they mean in the text. The kind of reading that pays attention to the levels of meaning in the text. The kind of reading that pays attention to the levels of meaning in the text. In the close reading, the new critics, that's you, should note how language is used imitatively and should differentiate it from how it is used connotatively. To differentiate it from how other words are used connotatively. The new critic should pay attention to the various levels of meaning in the text. This is done in order to resolve ambiguity, the tension, the conflict generated in the text through these various levels of meaning. So there's no limit to the number of times that a text could be read, depending on the level of difficulty. So don't be ashamed to read twice or thrice, or as many times as you want, because most times it's realized that whenever you return to the text, you have a fresh insight on its meaning. Whenever you return to the text, you have a fresh insight on what the text means. Right? Pay attention to the issues of prosody. Issues of prosody, the sound system of the poem, the metrical system of the poem. Pay attention to the issues of prosody, the sound system of the poem, the rhyme scheme, the meter in the poem. They will all help in understanding the meaning of the poem. The rhyme scheme, the meter, the sound system, the sound devices like alliteration, assonance, consonants. Prosody is spelled P-R-O-S-O. prosody. Prosody. Onomatopoeia. Alliteration. Assonance. Consonants. Rhyme scheme. All these can be discussed under the point prosody. Its sound system. The rhythm. The rhythm. Right? Pay attention to the structure of the poem. Pay attention to the structure of the poem. The form or the structure of the poem. This includes its organization, stanzaic form or structure. This includes its organization, stanzaic form or structure. Stanzaic form or structure. Because it can also reveal the meaning of the poem. When you put together the form, the structure, the rhyme scheme, you can reveal the meaning of the poem. For instance, a poem of 14 lines will suggest that it's a sonnet if it follows the other convention as well of the sonnet. So you also, an aspect of structure includes the verse form, like whether it is blank verse or free verse, whether it is blank verse or free verse, whether it is blank verse or free verse. Whether it is written in run-on line or end-stop lines, that is written in run-on lines or end-stop lines. That is written in run-on line or end-stop line. And then there is need to analyze the structure of the poem. There's also the need to structurally analyze the poem. There's need to analyze the structure of the poem. There's also the need to structurally analyze the poem. You need to structurally analyze the poem. This is what we call structural analysis. After this, after the analysis of structure, you should be able to look at the themes. The themes, which are the central ideas in the poem. So look at the themes, which are the central ideas in the poem. And then you should look at the language or poetic devices in the poem. The similes, the metaphor, the symbol, symbolism, the imagery, There are many of them. The imagery generated in the poem, the other poetic devices, like personification. So this is purely a study of forms, literary forms. Because it is in this form that the beauty of the text resides. Another important term in understanding formalism is objective correlative. It's objective correlative. Another important term in understanding formalism objective correlative. Objective correlative. Correlative is spelled C-O-R-R-E-L-A-T-I-V-E. Correlative is spelled C-O-R-R-E-L-A-T-I-V-E. T.S. Eliot gave a definition of objective correlative. T.S. Eliot once gave a definition of objective correlative. We are going to take it. So, quote, objective correlative refers to, quote, a set of objects, a situation, a situation, a chain of events, which shall be the formula of that particular emotion. Semicolon. I said a set of what? Objects, a situation, a chain of events, which shall be the formula of that particular emotion. Semicolon. Such that when the external facts, which must terminate in a sensory experience, are given, so that when the external facts, which must terminate in a sensory experience, are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. Unquote. The emotion immediately evoked, unquote. Objective correlative refers to a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, which must be the formula of that particular emotion, such that when the external facts, which must terminate in sensory experience, are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. E-V-O-K-E-D. So objective correlative refers to how emotion is systematically internalized in a work of art. the tool that helps the writer to systematically represent emotion in the work of art by the proper arrangement of words, images, and symbols. So the proper arrangement of words, images, and symbols. So the proper arrangement of words, images, and symbols. So the proper arrangement of words, images, and symbols. The internalization of emotion in the work of art with the proper arrangement of words, images, and symbols, so that when the reader encounters this set of symbols, they will evoke in the reader the appropriate emotion. The appropriate emotion. For instance, the mentioning of a coffin in a work of art signifies death. Signifies death. The use of the red color in certain contexts in the work of art signifies danger. So the poet has to be skilled or skillful in deploying objective correlative. Because everything in the work of art happens as a result of diction, word choice. Everything in the work of art happens as a result of what? Word choice, diction. So objective correlative can also refer to the artistic. Objective correlative can also refer to the artistic and literary technique of representing or evoking a particular emotion by means of symbols which become indicative of that emotion and are associated with it. Objective correlative refers to the artistic and literary technique of representing or evoking a particular emotion by means of symbols which become indicative of that emotion and are associated with it. I'll take it again. Objective correlative refers to the artistic and literary technique of representing or evoking a particular emotion by means of symbols which become indicative of that emotion and are associated with it. You can take a paragraph if you've not done so until now. Let's look at Russian formalism. Russian formalism. Russian formalism. Russian formalism is slightly different from the core new critical theory. Russian formalism is slightly different from the core new critical theory. Russian formalism is slightly different from the core new critical theory, core, C-O-R-E, in the sense that theorizations tilt towards the Saussures structuralist principle. Ferdinand de Saussure's structuralist principle. Ferdinand de Saussure's structuralist principle. Russian formalism is slightly different from the core new critical theory in the sense that it tilts towards Ferdinand de Saussure's structuralist principles. Full stop. The Russian formalists, have you not heard of Saussure before? Ferdinand de Saussure, I think. This is a structuralist. So when we want to study structuralism, we will talk more about him. So the Russian formalists argue that literature is a set of linguistic and cultural elements. To be subjected to analysis. Literature is a set of linguistic and structural elements to be subjected to analysis. This is what we have done in the preceding paragraphs, telling you about the imagery, the symbol, the structure, all this sound system that must be analyzed to bring out the meaning of the text. Paying attention to words. These are the elements of the text. For instance, when we talk about the poetics of literature, we talk about elements of the text. All right? And that is what the formalists pay attention to. They pay attention to the poetics of the work of art. Literature, therefore, becomes a self-enclosed system. Literature, therefore, becomes a self-enclosed system to be studied based on form rather than its content. This is what we've said right from the beginning of this class, simply repeating it. Literature then becomes a self-enclosed system to be studied based on form rather than its content. That means you pay attention to the language of the text. Studying a text based on form rather than content means that it is the language that will yield the meaning of the text. The Russian formalists rejected historical, biographical, and impressionistic criticism. The Russian formalists did what? Rejected historical, biographical, and impressionistic criticism. Impressionistic criticism is how the individual feels about the work of art, how the work of art makes the individual to feel, the impression that the work of art has on the individual. All right? And it is rejected in affective fallacy. So it's rejected where? In affective fallacy. You cannot interpret the text based on how you feel. Right? For them, as for the Russian formalists, literature should be studied scientifically. Literature should be studied scientifically. Literature should be studied scientifically. For its own sake, as art for art's sake. For its own sake, for its own beauty. Literature should be studied scientifically for its own sake. That is not as a means to getting at other objects, for its own sake, and not as a means to getting at other objects. That is, and not as a means to getting at other objects. Because it has nothing to do with social commitment, transforming society. No, literature should be studied for its own beauty. That's what art for art's sake is all about. Okay. So the focus of the Russian formalists was on the poetics of literature. Was on the what? The poetics of literature. And by the poetics of literature, we refer to the elements of literature. Elements of literature. Depending on the genre. Not that all genres of literature have their own elements, right? For example, if I ask you to mention the elements of prose, you'll be able to mention about 5 of them, right? And the element of poetry, which is studied in year 1, element of poetry, and element of drama. So the poetics of literature. The poetics of literature is the focus of the Russian formalists. By that it is meant all the techniques deployed. By that it is meant all the techniques deployed by the author to achieve poetic effects in the work. All the techniques deployed by the author to achieve poetic effects in the work. None is left untouched, except we don't recognize them. None should be left untouched. By the poetics of literature, it is referred to all the techniques deployed by the author to do what? To achieve poetic effects in literature, the work. You can take a paragraph. The scientific study of literature is an objective scrutiny or examination of its language and tropes. The scientific study of literature is an objective scrutiny or examination of its language and tropes. At the beginning of the class, we said that new criticism is a scientific study of the text. It gives us a scientific study of the text. So it is an objective scrutiny. Why is it objective? Why is it objective? Why? Because it pays attention to the text. It's text directed. It pays attention to the language of the text. That's why it is objective. That's why it is objective. Right? It is the objective scrutiny or examination of the language and tropes in the text. Literary language is different from ordinary language. That is why in new criticism we usually segregate between denotative meaning and commutative meaning. Literary language leads to defamiliarization. Literary language results to defamiliarization. Please pay attention to the term defamiliarization. It's an important term in new criticism. So the poet or the writer uses language to defamiliarize. Uses language to do what? To defamiliarize. Uses language to defamiliarize. Defamiliarization is the artistic use of language to create surprising effects, to surprise the reader. Defamiliarization is the use of language, artistic use of language, to pleasantly surprise the reader. To pleasantly surprise the reader. Defamiliarization is the artistic use of language to pleasantly surprise the reader. It is part of the beauty of literature. To talk about ordinary, everyday experiences in extraordinary ways. Alright? It expresses ordinary, everyday situations and events in surprising and extraordinary ways. It expresses everyday situations, ordinary, everyday situations in extraordinary and surprising ways. This is what all writers aim to achieve. This is what all writers aim to achieve. To talk about something in ways that will not bore the audience. Because it is the same experience that we have every day. But the author finds a way to render it in ways that make us love what the reader, what the writer has written. Right? We still have 5 minutes. Is there any problem? The Russian formalists also differentiate between the story and the plot. The Russian formalists also differentiate between the story and the plot. Because some people, when you say, tell us the plot of the work, they now begin to tell you the story. There's a difference between the story and the plot. Alright, the story is known as fibula, F-I-B-U-L-L. Russian. Fibula, F-I-B-U-L-L. And the plot refers to as sujet. S-J-U-Z-H-E-T. Sujet. S-U-S. So that's the plot. It's Russian. It might be sujet, might be sujet. Right? The story is the story as it actually happened in the text. The story is the story as it actually happened. The story is the event as it actually happened. Right? Whereas the plot is how the story is presented or arranged. Whereas the plot is how the story is presented or arranged. The plot can be manipulated. The plot can be manipulated through suspense. The plot can be manipulated through suspense, flashback, foreshadowing, temporal distortion. The plot can be manipulated through suspense, flashback, foreshadowing, temporal distortion, and other narrative techniques and other narrative techniques. It should be noted that formalism is not popular anymore, although it is making or staging a comeback. Although it's staging a comeback in recent literary history. Because people feel that, some critics feel that the jettisoning of language in the study of literature has made literature to lose its value, its original value. Some critics feel that the jettisoning of language in the study of literature, that is where literature pays more attention to history than literary elements, has made literature to lose its value. So formalism is what we call new formalism, and it's staging a comeback, right? But criticism right now focuses more on the content of the text than on the language, more on the history of the language. And this is where we bring our class to a close possibly. I hope that you